participants in the room and online, warm welcome to this session, Can We and Should We Rewrite Nature? This discussion is part of a broader discussion under eco-augmentation, which is combining scientific understanding, ecological principle, and adaptive design to deliberately, and here I insist on the word deliberately, try to enhance the resilience, the productivity, and the co-flourishing capability of ecosystem in the context of radical collaboration between human and nature. So intervention on nature is not new. It has started already, both unintentionally and intentionally. What is really new is the availability of powerful tools, such as CRISPR-Cas9, that are gene editor and that are able to accelerate the processes of these type of intervention. Examples include draft-proof crop or the engineering of microbe to revive degraded soil. Now, the question that we will try to address during this session are the following. What is already possible and what is on the horizon? Who is governing? Meaning, who is deciding on which type of intervention can be done and which type of intervention should not be done? Who is benefiting from this intervention? Another important question is, should we try to rewrite nature, or should we aim at radically collaborating with nature, or should we do both? And when we are rewriting nature, shouldn't we before rewrite ourselves, in the sense that we will need to enhance our emotional capability, enhance our inner development before trying to rewrite nature. And finally, why this is central to science and diplomacy anticipation. To discuss this different point, I'm very pleased to have 4 world-leading experts with me. Maja Groff, Convenor of Climate Governance Commission. Alexandre Antonelli, Director of Science, Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And Angela Mols, Professor of Botany and Ecology, UNSW. And Flores, who sent a video message that will be projected. But before opening the dialogue, let me first remind you that you can contribute to the conversation on social media by following GESDA Summit. You can find the full program, speakers' bio, and session detail in the GESDA Summit app. Let's now start with Alex. Humans have always been shaping our ecosystem. So what is new currently with this intervention? How this type of intervention, for example, differ from the production of GMO?
Thanks, Massamba. Great to be here. Yeah, so humans have always shaped, reshaped, messed up, and influenced nature. We've coexisted with nature for such a long time. And to be fair, even before our own species, early hominins also affected and influenced the distribution of species. We were hunting. So I think, in a sense, for tens of thousands of years, we've been doing this. What is really new is, I would say, two things. One is technology. You mentioned gene editing, and I think the revolution of genomics is just incredible. It's mind-blowing in all senses. And if you think about what the telescope has done to astronomy, our closest equivalent is DNA. And the price of DNA has decreased more than exponentially for many years now. And it's now really possible to take samples of individual species to identify what they are, but also what they're doing. Even environmental samples where we can assess the full diversity of the soil that you mentioned before, of tropical ecosystem by just sequencing a teaspoon of soil, and you find thousands of different species there. So that's really revolutionary, as well as remote sensing. So we can basically sense nature, and we can measure changes at an incredible speed. And the other difference here is the scale of the influence. And of course, we can think about the Green Revolution and how it drastically changed agricultural systems across the world. More recently, we are because of the huge demand on food production, really devastating many tropical ecosystems, but also here closer to where we are now. So yeah, I would say technology and scale are the two main differentials compared to the previous early evolution of humans.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is very important to highlight these two aspects, technology and science, that are used here, and scale. We are talking about intervention at a much broader scale. And maybe also replicability, because when it is well understood, you can replicate easily in different conditions. Now I'm turning to Angela, taking into account what Alex just said. Which are the most exciting development in science that you are aware of?
Yeah, it's really difficult to choose because there's so many amazing things going on. So I've got colleagues who are using advances in captive breeding to rewild, to introduce cute things like bilbies to ecosystems that they've been absent from for ages. I've got other colleagues who are replacing lost ecosystems. So we've got kelp forests off Sydney, 70-kilometre stretch where a major habitat-forming kelp used to live, and we destroyed it by pumping too much sewage in. And they're putting it back and regenerating this habitat. But they're using the technological advances, they're using genetics, they're figuring out which genotypes are going to be best in which place. And really doing an informed restoration. And referring back to something that you raised earlier, one of my students and I, we worked on using soil microbes to enhance the recruitment success of seeds going in at degraded mine sites in Western Australia. So the technology's there. Even things like seed pelleting, like wrapping each seed in a little protective coat that will help it to hold on to some water in these dry lands, can really improve the chances of restoration. So there's so many different things, and they're all advancing really quickly. And it's kind of nice that there's an optimistic side to counter some of the downsides that are going on.
Thank you. Now I will turn to you, Maja. Maybe you can also first give some example of things that excite you on what has been discussed. But you are a lawyer by background, and you work closely with the science. What are the legal, regulatory, and governance framework around this scientific development? Maybe first, what excites you? And then if you can address that question.
Yeah, absolutely, Massamba. Lovely to be here. And so I've been running this Climate Governance Commission for the last several years, working with leading planetary Earth system scientists like Johan Rockström, among others. And our philosophy in the Commission has really been starting from the science, the latest Earth system science, and then what does our international governance need to look like, driven by the science, rather than negotiating sort of separate from really a clear understanding of the latest science. And we've also shifted, indeed, because we have one of the founders of the Planetary Boundaries framework directly in the Commission, to this whole Earth system perspective. You cannot manage climate without looking at the other planetary boundaries. Biodiversity obviously is completely interdependent with our climatic changes and our ecosystems. So really, we have this vantage point of whole Earth system, interconnected ecosystem, big biophysical systems of the Earth. So these new scientific and technical developments with the synthetic biology, genetic engineering, with AI are really mind-boggling, and it just does seem like we're in this era of really accelerating scientific knowledge. So as long as we can manage the ethics, the governance, the moral risk dimensions, we have to, of course, apply old technologies, current technologies, and approaches and techniques that different human traditions, indigenous knowledge exactly have been applying for many, many years. So it's part of a holistic set of tools, and I think, but these new scientific kind of approaches can help to also restore a sense of agency, perhaps, to some extent, that we badly need with all the climate and ecological anxiety. So it's very promising. Also, this notion of ecological, social flourishing of systems, co-flourishing. Hopefully, there's this eco-augmentation field also helps to catalyze, cultural shifts, reflection really about our connections with the environment, nature, and our planetary Earth system, because we're dealing with challenges really at the Earth system scale. So in terms of the governance, we're fortunate in the sense that we have now a lot of international norms, UNFCCC and the broader climate governance regime, Paris Agreement, CBD, et cetera. We have a body of norms that help form a baseline for further developments in this area. But of course, with any emerging technologies and scientific knowledge, we have to get out ahead of developments to really go deep to develop the ethical frameworks, the technical risks of escape, et cetera. So those have to be really thought through very carefully. Hopefully, again, getting out in advance of these accelerating developments.
A lot of very interesting ideas. So science and ethics need to inform governance and policy making. I think it's really important. A holistic approach needs to be taken. We should not have a silo approach. All these things need to be considered holistically. All the 9 planetary boundaries should be handled holistically. And we can apply only if we can manage the impact. And finally, we need a cultural shift and inner development so that we can take care of all these very important things while being always guided by science and ethics. Now, moving to Angela back, we would like to draw from your work on global plant ecology and ecosystem adaptation. Can we hear from you how species and ecosystem are already evolving in response to human pressure, and how understanding these natural adaptive processes can inform responsible intervention?
Yeah, there's a few interesting dimensions here. The first is sort of actually deciding what we're aiming for. So one possibility is that we're aiming to allow species to migrate so that they can persist into the future. Another possibility is that we're doing a sort of a backward-looking conservation or restoration where we're trying to put things back to a historic state. And both of those sound good, and people are trying to do both of those, but they're actually not compatible. So I might repeat something I said in my own seminar yesterday, sorry. And that is, I think we have actually a version of the trolley problem. So, the philosophers talk about the idea of, an out-of-control train is going down the tracks, and it might kill these 4 people, but you could pull a lever and have it not kill this one. And I think we have a version of this going on with species changing in response to climate change. So for instance, if we've got climate change coming down the tracks, we've got an alpine ecosystem and it's threatened, but we've also got the possibility we could pull a lever and stop lowland species from invading that alpine ecosystem. But if we pull that lever, we'll kill those lowland species. And so we actually have to decide, what is it we're going for? Are we trying to maximize the percentage of species that persist into the future, or are we trying to put it back? And I actually have been arguing with the New South Wales government that we really need to be looking forwards, not back, because it's becoming increasingly impossible to actually go back. The other thing I was going to say with respect to evolution is that species are changing so quickly that it's actually kind of blowing up our ideals about things. So for instance, I've been studying an introduced species in New South Wales, came to New South Wales less than 100 years ago, and it's now changed so much that it won't successfully interbreed with its original source population. So it's a new native species. Should we be protecting this, or should we be eradicating it because it's a weed? There's lots that we haven't figured out about what it is we want and how we're going to manage that.
I think the point that you have raised is really a very important one. Should we only be reactive, backward-looking, or should we be more vision-driven and forward-looking? One important aspect is when we are reactive and backward-looking, we focus on solving problem. And solving problem is more about moving away from where I am, but it does not say where I will land. Whereas if you define where you would like to land and backcast, you can take into account all the different aspects of the issue. So thank you for this very interesting perspective. Back to you, Maja. So as a lawyer, deeply engaged in the science, what are the advances that you find particularly promising and those that are also concerning? What is the current state of international legal and governance framework for managing this intervention? And what framework, local, regional, or global, do we need to decide which intervention move forward?
Yeah, so again, in terms of these new scientific developments, I mean, if we can learn some lessons from the AI experience, obviously, where the commercial developments were so fast that regulators are trying to catch up at all levels. So that's, of course, really important. But as I was mentioning before, we do have a very strong body of norms, you know, concepts of benefit sharing, for example, amongst many others, that can sort of inform this next generation governance and the thinking that we need to do. And we're also seeing at various levels really extraordinary, I would say, next generation kind of governance frameworks. Alex, what you shared about the Atlantic forest sort of governance frameworks, the Senegal River Basin work across 4 different countries that I heard about yesterday, absolutely extraordinary in terms of very high levels of governance, legitimacy, engaging, you know, senior levels of the various states involved, but also down to the local level, involving women and youth, and really, you know, this ecosystem restoration and really sustainable, also tailored sort of economic flourishing. So I think we can look at some really extraordinary models that are popping up in various parts of the world. Also, my friends from New Zealand keep reminding me about the Wanganui River governance structure. It just won a prize for excellence in policy with the World Future Council, and this is a governance structure based on Maori thinking and wisdom, giving the river actual legal personality. And linking this co-governance structure with the river itself and representatives, with the Maori, with the local community, with the state level government. So we have these, I think, emerging extraordinary models that also bridge, you know, from natural science to social science. Yeah, so I think there's a lot going on, and moreover, in the international sphere, there's a lot of forward motion on like the human right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, intergenerational rights as well that are extremely pertinent to this field. But what I would say generally about these developments, one, there's an implementation and accountability gap in the international governance and indeed at other levels of governance that we're very actively working on, but also the anticipatory approach of our current international government is not strong. We're running these massive risks in terms of biodiversity loss, ecosystem destruction, climate, just extraordinary risks, but we're not anticipating and planning and making sure we're very close to what the best available science informs us that we need to do.
Maybe just to follow up on what you have said, can we dream about a planetary constitution that would define relation among nations, that would be based on interdependency rather than competition, and relation between human and nature that will be based on collaboration rather than domination?
Yes, I think we can dream of that. And I would argue we already have a sort of international constitution which affirms coexistence amongst people, human rights, etc., in the UN Charter. But indeed, since 1945, we have now moved into the Anthropocene. We understand we have to make peace with nature, as UNEP has said. So there's many ways and avenues to integrate that into the current charter. There's a group now working on charter reform, for example. I've written on that topic. And other ways to defragment our current international environmental architecture and to have core values sort of affirmed at the center.
Do you want to add anything on that? So let's then turn to the video that was shared by one of our panelists that was not able to make it in person. Can you please display the video?
From our perspective, or from indigenous worldviews, and also through bioculture systems design, is that the crisis is now about humans rewriting nature. Nature is in continuous evolution, is a systems in evolution, but about humans rewriting themselves. And this is a particular place from which we should departure, from colonialism, which is fundamentally driven by the external acquisition and extraction of resources such as land, minerals, and people, for the benefit and wealth accumulation of the colonizing power. This creates a cascading of consequences, including the establishment of systems of dominance, oppression, and rationales, such as assertions of superiority or justification like terra nullius, data nullius, and water nullius, used to claim resources and undermine indigenous sovereignty and institutionality. At its core, colonialism represents a clashing conflict between two worldviews. One that treats territory as a resource to be exploited and profited from, and another one that treats territory as interconnected partner necessary for sustaining a particular way of life in this earth. Therefore, the transformative change that requires humans is to abandon the colonial mindset of extraction and dominance, and instead adopt a relational ontology.
Great. Now back to you, Alex, after this video. Looking 10, 20 years ahead, how could the scientific and ecological development promote human ecosystem co-flourishing? What is the value of anticipating this development?
Thanks. I really think we have to be one step ahead. I used to think that there were two kinds of people. Those were anthropocentric, really only or mostly care about people. And people like myself when I was a kid, biocentric, just with the love of nature. But now I really realize we have to be holocentric. And I think working with WariNkwi yourself in this initiative supported by GESDA, which we're calling eco-augmentation, has been quite revealing because we have to understand the direction of travel for science. Of course, we don't know the breakthroughs, but we know that this is happening fast. The example was made about AI, and without that regulatory framework which enables scientists to operate, it will be very hard, and we may make mistakes which we'll deeply regret afterwards. So I think, is this in the form of sandbox approaches where innovation can happen, but we fully understand, map, and minimize risks, or are they approaches, using AI and doing all the experiments. But I think we need to be realistic that the world is changing rapidly. Even though I love just, being in the rainforest or visiting some of the amazing ecosystems on this planet, we know that the spread of diseases, invasive species, climate change impacts on species, which is completely affecting and altering nature, means that we can't go back. We have to move forward, and we have to move forward in ways that benefit ourselves, but benefit the ecosystem functions, the species themselves, and that one health approach and one planetary approach, which is absolutely the way forward. So I think anticipation is critically important, but perhaps even more the framework for us to operate, for us to innovate, because we need to understand the rules of the game and what needs to be true for this to be successful. So I think that's the kind of pragmatic approach without excluding any technologies or any approaches a priori, and have an open-minded approach, because we need to embrace that innovation because it's happening anyway. And so unless we now really recognize the critical importance of creating that framework in high-level principles for augmenting our ecosystems, I think we'll regret that afterwards.
Well, thank you for your intervention. I think it put clarity on this difference between eco-augmentation and regeneration, because many people are always asking what is the difference, what is conservation, what is regeneration, what is eco-augmentation. I think this concept of looking forward rather than trying to solve problem and move backward is a very important aspect in this differentiation. You want to add something, Angela?
I guess there was too much time where conservation was really separate to humans. And I mean, that's nuts from an indigenous perspective. But it's also clear that it's not working anywhere. And so bringing people in and actually giving people agency to contribute in a way that, they can see themselves making a positive impact on the world. That's a really important thing for actually countering climate grief in our youth, for instance, giving people this agency and a real part of this, rather than going, we've got our perfect little piece protected over here, you stay away.
So at the beginning, Maja provided a framework saying that we need to have ethics and science informing governance and decision-making. Can you elaborate a little bit on the importance of ecological evidence, local ecosystem dynamic, and evolutionary potential informing governance? Angela? Yes. Yes.
I think our understanding of ecosystems it's improving very, very quickly. But I think most policymakers would be quite disappointed if they understood how bad our ability to predict really is. We've got so much to learn, and particularly in the context of these really rapidly changing environments. So we've got to take that growing knowledge body, but we've got to improve our understanding really, really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add here, I think it's really not thinking that we can engineer nature moving forward. We have to learn more, and we have to really have that space where we can really characterize and drive insights so that we can potentially make some particular interventions. And that's where precision agriculture comes from, and that's where many of the techniques which are very precise and definite, where you can test the effect of particular interventions. So that's why I think that combination of learning from nature and indigenous and traditional knowledge as well, and integrating that with the latest technology is so powerful.
Great. Now, let's come back to the opportunities, looking at what has been already done, what we have done till now. Where do you see the greatest opportunity? If you get this right, maybe first for you, Maja, on governance and safeguard.
Wonderful. Yes, so as has been said, you know, the latest technical scientific knowledge with these new incredible tools, with the ethics, with the governance, which is really being workshopped. But also, just to note, in parallel, we need these cultural and other social science shifts, for example, in economics. We're also there working with very old paradigms, which are very, very destructive of nature. So we have to also think across multiple areas of human knowledge that have to be calibrated, recalibrated, and lined up. So that's why we spent a lot of time with the progressive business community, who often also want stronger science-based policy from governments, for example. So we just have to keep our understanding of how these various human, social, and natural systems are interacting. And a lot of the work on, you know, beyond GDP, true value accounting, ecosystem services, that's very, very important work also to do at the same time as, you know, ethics and different safeguards for various technology. And just from our perspective, we think there are tremendous opportunities in the science and diplomacy space. We've at the international level, we've built up our scientific knowledge through the IPCC, IPBES, UNEP, etc., our very fragmented international governance system, which can, there are ways to defragment that. We've done, you know, starting to do work on how would we upgrade UNEP, consolidate the different various secretariats, as well as in terms of the urgency of what we're confronting. The Secretary General has proposed an emergency platform in the lead up to the Summit of the Future in the face of future global shocks. And we would suggest that we should already put together such a platform. It would be just defragmenting the international system. It wouldn't be creating a new institution. And then also with full Earth system risk monitoring to put together the scientific knowledge we already have and the monitoring in the international system, and to have a high-level reporting, which is about risk reporting and anticipation. So we need more diplomats in the international space who have this vision. Secretary General has said it's, you know, this is really a crossroads for the international community, the greatest shared test since World War II, etc. I would say it's maybe even a greater shared test because these are very novel, complex challenges. So we need to be thinking at scale and using all the excellent work that we already have. And just one last thing in terms of the science and diplomacy is the accountability piece. We need more diplomats in harmony with the science to say, a proper accountability framework in terms of international governance, and of course at all levels, is absolutely part of enlightened self-interest. We need to move to proper, stable governance with also enhanced and clever support and accountability mechanisms.
Great. Now moving to Alex on the same topic, greatest opportunity on ecological reality and resilience.
Yeah, so I think we've never seen as much you know, challenges in environment as we see today. But I've never been as optimistic about the future. And we know this can be a turning point. And we know that from all the scientific evidence that there is still time to turn things around and to bend the curve on biodiversity loss, for instance. So we have those incredibly ambitious frameworks. So the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Climate Agreement. And we know we don't have to choose between them. That's really exciting because we know that we can have synergies by developing solutions at local, regional levels which will benefit climate change mitigation, which will tackle biodiversity loss and will benefit the people there. So I'm really excited. And part of that is through, as every session, I think, in this conference has been thanks to AI. So we are now using, for instance, different sorts of machine learning to deal with that sheer complexity of real biological systems and socio-ecological systems. And that's guiding us to make more cost-effective decisions. How do we best use the scarce resources that we have in order to, for instance, to identify what are the priority areas for ecological restoration, what are the best methods which will give us the best outcomes in terms of carbon capture or biodiversity recovery, and we can do that. So, one thing we're trying to do now is within this eco-augmentation framework to demonstrate this at different regional levels, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution to everything. So one of the things is that we are having demonstrations in different ecosystems, in coral reefs, in the Caribbean, in Senegal, we're hoping to launch something there as well. In my home country, Brazil, where in just a few weeks we're going to launch a new field station in the heart of the Atlantic forest, which is this incredibly diverse but very threatened ecosystem, where exactly this kind of learnings, how to engage with stakeholders, with local communities, and use the latest technology, indigenous knowledge, to really restore ecosystems which are going to be resilient and may not be exactly as we had in the past, but will survive through centuries to come. So I'm very excited, and I think there are lots of demonstrations we need to do, and we need to really seize that opportunity now, thanks to technology, thanks to that knowledge that exists today.
Thank you. Angela,
Nice
where do you see the opportunities?
Yeah, I think there's two main things that give me real hope. The first is related to the single biggest problem we have, which is, of course, habitat loss. There's lots of really nice examples of restoration projects, and these are driven at lots of different scales. And the ones I particularly love are the community-led ones, where there's just all sorts of positive benefits to the people at the local scale, and it just makes everybody feel good and healthier, happier, wealthier, and that's just beautiful. So those are really cool. The other thing is kind of related, is getting ecology and conservation out of its bubble and having people truly understand the importance of our ecosystems for economics, for human health, for mental health, for all sorts of things, in addition to, we need to protect the biodiversity, which has only got us so far. So I'm really hopeful on that count. However, there are still a lot of things we can't do. Like we might go, it'd be great to just get rid of all of the invasive species. And we can do that on little islands, but we can't do it at scale yet. So there's a lot of stuff that has to happen small while being governed by an overarching framework that brings us all together, so we're actually working in that positive direction together.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now I would like to turn to the participant. If you have any question or comment, please stand up and introduce yourself before you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for this session. I'm Martin Gerstal from CERN. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that eradication of invasive species in islands is possible. I visited quite a few islands that were, well, not pristine, but as much as they used to be. What value do you put on these sort of initiatives in the grand scheme of things? Thank you.
It's a very good question. So there are some beautiful examples of that. I grew up in New Zealand, so there's lots of offshore islands there where they've eradicated, like New Zealand only has 3 native species of mammals, and they're bats, unless you count the seals. And 2 of them walk on their elbows because they're funny. We've eradicated all the mammals from a whole bunch of these islands, and the increase in bird life and plant life in response to that is tremendous. There are also mainland islands where they've put up predator-proof fences and taken out the mammals from inside those. And one of the things that they noticed from those is a real spillover in bird populations into surrounding areas, so that it really makes a difference to people's lives. They see these birds that they haven't seen for decades actually in their neighborhoods again. So it's really cool. But it is on a very local scale. And things like, wouldn't it be nice to eradicate the cane toad from Australia or something, is just not something that's happening in the next 5 or 10 years, I think. So, yeah. But we shouldn't give up, I think.
Great. Any other question or comment? Yeah.
Hi, David Kong from MIT and also part of the Eco-Augmentation Task Force with Massamba and Alex. Thank you all so much for the really wonderful conversation. Angela, I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more. I really appreciated what you're saying about kind of grassroots, more youth-led and community-led action. And so I was wondering if you could just expand on that and maybe offer some examples that have been successful and things that you're, ways that we can actually kind of operationalize and make that more actionable.
Yeah, I think there's lots and lots of examples. I suspect I'm not the person on the panel who has the most of these. But things like in Australia, talking to Indigenous people about the fire regimes that used to be applied. And one of the things that it took a startlingly long time to realise is that you don't just talk to the Indigenous men, you also have to talk to the Indigenous women because they hold some different knowledge. So there's some real benefits to biodiversity coming out of those. But I'm also just thinking of the local scale initiatives. Like I'm thinking in the Gold Coast, there were sand mines, right? And these habitats were nothing. And just local people have come in and they've planted things and got them together. And you go there now and it looks like a pristine natural ecosystem. And they feel so proud. And they've really enhanced their erosion resistance for their properties and things. So there's biodiversity gains, there's human happiness gains. This is the sort of thing that's really nice. It's not going to save the world on its own. But if there are lots and lots of those, then it adds up to a big difference.
If I could just add quickly on that, I think that there's a bit of a divide today in terms of, bottom-up versus top-down versus bottom-up. And I think it's a bit unnecessary because, of course, there's a huge amount of local knowledge, which is incredibly important. At the same time as an initiative like here, through the diplomacy and contacts that exist in this room, in our networks, I think there is a transferability element which is very powerful, where solutions have been found, and sometimes it is about invasive species in different areas. So just as an example, the fact that now in Ethiopia, the cultivation of the false banana or the tree against hunger could potentially be applied across ecosystems across sub-Saharan Africa, but that hasn't been the case, and people haven't tried that. So I think there are some good elements of transferring knowledge and insights, which I think moving ahead, especially because of this globalized world where, perhaps local communities have not interacted with particular species or threats for such a long time, I think we could really add value by launching this initiative.
Thank you so much. I think we had a lot of excellent input provided by the speakers, and we can go back home with a very interesting takeaway. Forward-looking approach rather than backward-looking approach. It's very important. We need to have a vision-driven approach in our interaction with nature, guided by science, ethics, and ecological principles that we can learn from indigenous people. Holistic approach where we consider all the 9 planetary boundaries, and the relation with nature that are more based on co-flourishing rather than domination, empowering rather than alienation, production rather than extraction, and interdependence rather than domination, solidarity rather than hierarchy. I would like to invite you to join me in thanking our speakers, and I would like also to thank our participants, both in person in this room and those that are also participating online. But before that, I would like also to say that we can keep the discussion ongoing on GESDA Summit. And the final panel session of the summit will take place in Auditorium A at 12. So please join me in providing a round of applause to our distinguished speakers.